Hey, what is up, everyone? Can y'all hear me? We got some comments in here I haven't seen yet. So a bunch of stuff up here from 510. Welcome Tan to the comments. We got a few other things up here. Isn't this an hour-long video? Today we're gonna go. Let's put it this way, guys. I got 2 hours on my list today. We got a lot to cover. You don't have to stay that long. You can come and go as you need to. We're going to start Unit 1. We're going to take it all the way to Unit 3. That's my goal. Normally, yeah, absolutely. I go about an hour. I've only gone to an hour and a half twice in the past, and that's for an FRQ review that we did. Dylan, welcome. Let's see. Is it Boomy? Miss Boomy Patel? Don't be nervous. That's why you're here, because we're going to get you squared away. Let's see. I get it. You know, the AP exam is pretty nerve-wracking. A lot of you may not have taken an exam like this. I'm going for 2 hours tonight. Tan is absolutely correct. Hey, you know what? 3-5. As long as your college takes it, you're gonna save $1,500 on a geography class when you guys start off. Let's take a look. We have a question. Yo, it's so good to be back. I had ACO reconstruction. It's been a couple of weeks since I was here. Miss Amanda took over for me, and it was spectacular, I'm sure. How much time should I really be spending reviewing Unit 1 since it's the smallest percentage of the course or of the questions? All right, that is a good question. So let's start answering. Well, and it looks like Evelyn went on there, and a few people have commented on this question as well. Let's see. Study until you know it, very safe and sorry. Besides, even if the questions don't directly address Unit 1, Unit 1 is the base. Absolutely true. Everything ties together, so I know knowing one unit will help. Yes. Will, just to add to the original question, to what extent are questions about historical geographers actually on the AP exam? All right, so let's look at this question. Unit 1 is less. Something's wrong with the audio. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Can everybody else hear me okay? Awesome, awesome, awesome. Elizabeth, if you need to, try to come out and come back in and see if that helps. I'm not sure what's going on with that. So the Unit 1 question, it's good to look at. If you look at the course articulation, which I showed y'all last time I was on, for Unit 1, there's a lot of stuff there that crosses over into other units, as Evelyn just said. So, for example, it mentions models like the rank size rule. It mentions models like central place theory. Talks about, I think the diffusion might be on there as well, and we cover diffusion and culture. So there's definitely some topics there in Unit 1 that you need to know in conjunction with other groups. There will never be a strictly Unit 1 question on the FRQ. So if they pull information from Unit 1 on the FRQ, it's going to be in relation to the other 6 units, all right? So keep that in mind. Yes, there are going to be questions on the multiple choice that cover Unit 1. So we're gonna look at all that. In terms of the geographers, it's hard to say. I would know. I probably would know the ones there in the like the Princeton Review or the AP Human Geography. So I would know Carl Sauer. I would know Eratosthenes. Yeah, I would know them, but you don't need to know like a deep biography of these individuals. Associate Eratosthenes with like the circumference of the Earth, and with something like the study of geography as a subject of study, as an actual discipline in and of itself. There's a great Carl Sagan video from the Cosmos on YouTube about Eratosthenes. It's everything you need to know about that guy. For Carl Sauer, I would know about him in respect to the cultural landscape. So let's see. I think that's good for that first question. Next question. Hey, I have a Unit 6 FRQ tomorrow. What's the difference between primate, city, and rank size rule? I'm gonna put a suggestion in the comment for that question because that's something I want to spend more time on later. But on YouTube, look up Dan Snyder rank size rule, and that right there will bring you to a video that will absolutely answer that question for you in more detail. Or if you're 500 plus, last time I was on, we talked about that in the lecture. If I were to start studying today for the AP exam, how much should I study each day to get a 5? man, that depends on you, really. That depends on how well you can read and retain. That depends really on how much you put into the course thus far. So I can't really answer that. I mean, it really just depends. What I would definitely do is sit down and make a calendar of when you want to actually schedule time to sit down and study, and I would stick to that. Just like a gym, just like a practice for a football game. You know, the more you put into it, the better you're going to do on the exam. And I do think your goal should be a 4 or 5. Obviously, most courses are going to take a 3, or most colleges are going to take a 3 as well. Does the crash course book cover everything? No book covers everything. So what I would do if I were you is I would use your textbook. I would pick 1 or 2 human geography review manuals, and I would go through it and try to get as much as you can from those, and use other resources. Maybe they're online or whatnot, but you're never going to find a single book that's got everything you need to know. But if you read through the material that you have at your disposal, and like I said, I wouldn't get more than 1 or 2 review manuals. You can get iScore 5 if you want. They got really good practice for multiple choice and FRQs, and I know some of those guys personally that create those questions. They're spectacular. I wouldn't overload yourself with resources, because then you'll be so concerned with trying to get everything that you'll miss the big picture, and that's what you really need. Best review book for the exam. The best review book, in my opinion, is I'm going to give you 2, all right, for different reasons. The blue AMSCO Human Geography book is my favorite for content review, but you can't get the test key without your teacher ordering it and getting it for you. If you want to use one that comes with a test key so you can check your answers, which at this point I think is probably best for everyone, then I would either get Princeton Reviews Cracking the AP Human Geography Exam, or the Kaplan version. I think it's called Human Geography by Kaplan. So okay. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take a quick break from these questions, and we are going to look at the content review and get started with that, because we got a lot to do today. Make sure that everyone is getting the most they can. I will come back and look at the questions. So if y'all have one that you want to be like super answered, definitely go in and upvote that question, and I'll get to those as I can. Let me get my captions going. Let me get my pointer on. We are ready. Let's do this, guys. Objectives. Simple. We're going to review the concepts in the human geography based on the course articulation for the College Board. If you want to see this as we go through it, feel free to Google APHG course articulation, and you will be able to get there and see the document on which the course is based. One other thing I wanted to point out real quick is I have you can't see me. Uh-oh. Hang on, let me make sure I shared my screen right. Yeah, that's right. I screwed up. Okay. There we go. That should be better, right? Okay. So now y'all can see me. Sorry about that. It's been a couple of weeks. I forget everything, right? So a few weeks ago, on Thursday the 28th, we were finishing up agriculture. I say a few months ago, and I modeled an FRQ. Okay, I modeled an FRQ. So if you want to see a real College Board FRQ get answered and kind of understand what my mindset is in terms of thinking it through, in terms of outlining a response, and also in terms of how it's going to be graded. If you're a 500 Plus member, you can definitely go back and see these reviews, changes in agriculture, and then the measures of development. And this one, I answered a FRQ about the organic farming and dairy farmers. And over here, I showed you how it's going to be graded by the reader during the week that they read the exams in Cincinnati. So if you want to see that, I highly recommend you go back in and look at that. If you're a 500 Plus, you can definitely do that. If you're not 500 Plus, I would consider spending, what is it, $40, so you don't have to spend $1,500 in college. All right, Unit 1.1, the where of what, the spatial perspective. These two terms, in terms of my understanding, they mean the same. So when I use them, I use them synonymously. What Unit 1 is looking at is it's a general understanding of the basic concepts of what human geography is. The stuff that kind of ties into every other unit. Questions that geographers are going to ask is, where are people and activities found on Earth, and why are they found there. And that's what your teacher means every single time he says or she says the why of where, which I'm sure you guys have probably heard that. So if you think like a geographer, you're going to think of things in terms of how they bring people together across space. And really, that is the spatial perspective right there. For example, if you look at New York City, it is the most economically significant city on Earth. It's also headquarters of the United Nations. It is a cultural melting pot where people from all over the world come and mingle and migrate to and look. It's also the definition historically of the American dream. You got people from Europe who used to come over here and think that literally think that the streets were made of gold and you know, things like that. So definitely that's what geography is. That's what people are doing when they're thinking spatially. Another way of thinking spatially is considering the way that we travel across from one place to another. That has changed dramatically over time. What you're looking at here is a map that shows air traffic. Now, you don't have to be super analytical or a major genius to know where most of the air traffic in the world is today. So why is it North America and Europe that's getting the most back and forth traffic in terms of where people are going? Well, that plays into the big picture. That plays into economics. That plays into culture. It plays into development. These are some of the most developed regions on the face of the planet. People here can afford to get on a plane and go on vacations and stuff. And we might talk about, you know, hashtag first world problems. Gas is so expensive. How am I going to afford to travel to California on a family trip this year? But yet we still somehow find ways to make it happen because we can. In places like sub-Saharan Africa, you see very, very little because developmentally, most people are farmers. Most people are barely able to support their families, and there's not enough money for them to get on planes and stuff. So just looking at airline traffic map, you can make some serious inferences about the why and where, about why is it that things happen where they do. And so let's see next. Tourist destinations, same thing. Anybody know what kind of map this is? Savannah, we're gonna go for about 2 hours tonight. Normally it lasts about an hour, but these next few we're gonna go for 2 hours simply because we have a lot to do, and I want to make sure you guys are all super prepared. But if you need to leave early, feel free to do it. If you need to leave early and come back, feel free to do that as well. It's okay. So it looks kind of like a choropleth, and I can see where you think that. But yes, Will, that is a cartogram. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to know these types of maps, and we are going to spend some time looking specifically at them. But what a cartogram does is it distorts the mess out of the landforms in order to show a phenomenon, or whatever that is, some kind of data. In this case, looking at tourist destinations, and you can see that Europe is by far the biggest. We just saw the Notre Dame Cathedral burn up. That was a huge. I had friends that were there when that was happening. Huge tourist destination. From seeing the two maps before, we can make connections about Europe and the rest of the world. And these connections are mainly economic, mainly cultural. There's also some history in that. People want to see Venice in Italy. They want to see Notre Dame in Paris. They want to see the Versailles Palace, and they want to see places in Germany and places in the UK. They want to see these things because of its history and because of all that. So there's always going to be connections between places. And so that is what we're looking to figure out today by looking, and there is an example of Notre Dame Cathedral as one of these major tourist destinations. This here was in the news. Did y'all know that the same time Notre Dame Cathedral was burning up, you've got the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is where the Dome of the Rock, the third holiest site in all of Islam, and located on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, also had a fire. Now that fire was not it wasn't where the rock is, and it is not nearly as big of a deal as this in terms of the damage that was done. But this was such a big deal globally that you didn't even hear about the Al-Aqsa Mosque because this was being majorly covered, which again kind of shows this phenomenon right here. People really care deeply about the things that are there. And there is a Notre Dame Cathedral today, or I guess during the fire. In terms of the numbers, I got this from Fan Maps on Instagram. If you guys don't follow that, it's a spectacular Instagram account. They show all kinds of really cool maps that pertain to this course. I know it's a little late in the game, but if you're on Instagram, I would definitely find Fan Maps, and they post up all the time. And it's fantastic. But you can look here and see the deep history of this one cathedral. I mean, built somewhere around the 1300s. All the way up to 2019, who would have thought that this would survive the Napoleonic era? It would survive World War II. It would survive all these different events and all these histories and stand the test of time just to burn up today. So again, you think about the significance of something like Notre Dame. Other really important things can happen and be overshadowed by that simply because of the significance associated with the place in terms of the minds of people across Earth. So again, just looking at the spatial perspective. What is the spatial significance of the cathedral? Well, it is a symbol of Christianity, right? A big part of our study of culture. It is a historical monument intertwined with huge historical events like the coronation of Napoleon. As mentioned right here on the map, you guys have all seen the picture, hopefully, of Napoleon getting, the crown. He takes the crown from the Pope and puts it on his own head because he's Napoleon. It's a symbol of Europe's legacy, a tourist attraction where on Easter weekend they were saying there was going to be over 50,000 expected to visit. So it's almost like you might even could call that like a pilgrimage point. I mean, I don't know if people are going there as more of if they're going there as more of a tourist thing or if they're going there for some kind of a deep religious conviction. But nevertheless, you can imagine people are going to be there for either one. It also brings in people who are interested in these things below. In France, it's even more than that. It's a revenue builder. People go there to see the cathedral, and then they buy into some of the local cuisine, some of the fashion, and it's a point of pride. It's a part of French identity. One of my favorite things in recent history was being able to witness the eclipse of 2017. Anybody remember this eclipse? Anybody ever see it? Like in the direct line of the eclipse? I thought it was fantastic. I live in South Carolina. It got pretty dark. It was the coolest thing I've ever seen. Honestly, I was just overwhelmed by how awesome. I started playing for it in December of 2016, and Columbia is about right there where my cursor is. That Columbia was like the spot in globally where people were just gonna fill in and come in and look at this. People from all over the state, people from all over. I had family in Colorado that came over to visit with us. It passed right over us. People reacted to this event. People reacted to it by preparing for it in December of 2016. You sold out of solar glasses. Krispy Kreme made special Eclipse donuts, which were just awesome because they're nothing but chocolate glaze. There's tourism in Columbia and other places where there was totality. The news covered it nonstop. Social media, people were putting stuff all over the place. Local events, there were viewing sites. I know there were places that hosted like eclipse parties near where I was. And so you had all these different things that happened in conjunction with, and I guess in response to this geographic event. And so those, again, are the kinds of things that we want to look at in terms of understanding this spatial perspective and the interconnectedness of people and how we all kind of react to one another and in relation to geography. This map here, I saw this on the Facebook teachers page about a year ago, and it's incredibly outdated. But notice also the key here: Protestant, Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Mohammedan. Anybody call Muslims Mohammedans? And heathen. Now wait a second. Wait, who we call heathen? So we don't use this terminology anymore. This map here is a symbol of a certain history, of a certain culture during that history. I don't know what the age of this map is, to be honest with you, but the reason why I'm showing you here is because, again, perspective and I guess spatial perspective in terms of how people view their differences is going to change over time and also across space. I mean, yeah, right, lady. What? We don't use that terminology anymore. Another thing that we need to think about when studying Unit 1 is the idea behind geospatial data. Back in the 1800s, no kidding. Geospatial data, are y'all familiar with that terminology? I know it's like super complex sounding. It sounds so like, I don't know, nerd talk. When we talk about geo, we're talking about geography. We talk about anything dealing with spatial is having to do with space on Earth. So when we talk about geospatial data, data is numbers that tell us stuff about how people live and what people do. You're looking at any data that can be tracked across the Earth's surface. And the way we do this is by creating maps that can visualize this data. So any of this data that can be visualized on a map is known as geospatial data. And it can help us understand the why of where. Right? So any data can be visualized on our surface, and we use map projections for taking the Earth and applying it to a two-dimensional surface. So I would definitely know what geospatial data is, and I would know what a map projection is, right? Peyton, I'm telling you what, man, you just have it broken down in just the right way, any of this stuff is going to make more sense. That's hopefully what I'm going to be able to do today. All right, I'm going to take a quick time out and look at some of these questions because I have a lot more here. Let's see. I got 9 upvotes here. How important are the models for the test? The models are incredibly important for the test. You are going to see them represented in both multiple choice as well as FRQs. I should have them all memorized at this point, but I know that they've asked questions in the past about demographic transition. I know that they've asked questions about there's been population pyramids, and I want to say that I'm not gonna say it off cuff. I can't remember I should know them. I've been teaching class forever, but I know that the central place theory has never been discussed. I don't think rank size rule has, but you will see them in the form of both multiple choice as well as potential FRQs. People they love putting diagrams, images, and I wouldn't call them documents. They're not documents, but things that get you to analyze charts and data and maps and things like this. And so you absolutely will see the models represented both in the FRQ as well as the multiple choice. They've done von Thunen before, things like that. See, I would definitely, if I don't study anything else, I would study the models and also their application. Very, very important. Good question. Let's see. Are architectural designs for houses related to ethnic cultures important to know for the exam? Yes, because it is in the course description, but I would not spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure out how they're going to pitch a question on that. I would know that at a very basic level. So what I would do is just look and see what it says in the Rubin. Assuming most of you are probably using Rubinstein, they cover that. You could probably also Google it or look in any of the human geography reviews, and what's there is what I would know. And I think the main thing that I have always told my students to know about that is in relation to the spatial diffusion of those housing patterns. So if you're looking at the original diffusion, there's a map in the Rubinstein book that shows the ones that were kind of in the north, the ones that kind of diffused in the mid-Atlantic, and the ones that were more southern. I would kind of just on the surface know that, and also know that today we don't have a particular diffusion pattern because houses, much like the one I'm living in right now, as well as many others, are just kind of created from a mold and mass produced. And so you don't really see that anymore today. I would just know personally surface stuff on that and let it be done and focus on things otherwhere. Hopefully I'm right in telling you guys that. What is the best way to practice FRQ? The best way to practice FRQ is to practice FRQ. If you Google college, let's see, AP HG FRQ released, or I guess, honestly, God, if you just Google APHG FRQ, you can probably find the link to where they've all been released. Every FRQ ever asked on the AP exam is there for you to see. You can see the questions. You can see what the answer is. You can see the rubric. You can see how students answered the question. what I would do is I would go there, I'd pull some of those questions, and I would write them. If you get the chance, if you're a 500 Plus member, go back and look at the one we did together on February the 28th, and I will show you what that looks like, and I'll also show you how it gets graded by the AP readers. But that's exactly what I would do, is I would practice doing FRQs. Another thing is that I know that the review manuals have sample FRQs that usually are not nearly as good, but they are definitely good for getting you thinking in that direction. So yes, I would certainly spend time with the FRQ. How to record it. Peyton, we actually record these and make them available for 500 Plus members. Is there any way to rewatch this in the future? Yes, you can rewatch this if you're a 500 Plus member. Hey, and something else, you guys, if I were you, I would do is I would take notes. And also, if you come back next week, have questions and things, or things that you might want answered, and have those ready as well. And we can talk about them. How often are case studies that we have to memorize on the AP exam? I'm not sure. All right, so I think I know what you mean by this. Like, for example, when we studied migration last year, I had my students study the Rohingya Muslims that were being pushed out of Bangladesh. All right, so that was a case study in a way on refugees. The questions that you are about to have on the AP exam were written like a year and a half ago. All right, so you won't see anything that's in the news right now, but it's good to know those case studies, because it helps you understand the application of the content. And so that's what your teacher is trying to do. And a lot of the things that they present you with, like, for example, if you're looking at refugees, I would say understanding the Syria refugee crisis, understanding South Sudan, or any of those things that have happened within recent history that may have been discussed in those topics. I would definitely have a kind of a surface understanding of those things as well. Do we need to know specific stuff, real life conflicts like Yugoslavia and stuff? Yes, I would be familiar with them. Again, I wouldn't spend hours and hours and hours trying to do a deep historical study, but be able to answer questions about it and have like a understanding of what that conflict is. In this case, we're looking at things having to do with ethnic conflicts, differences in the way people live in terms of their culture, their religion, their language, that causes them to have conflict when they're geographically close to one another. So I would know it in that context for sure. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to take a break from the questions again. I'm going to move on. Okay, and feel free to keep putting them in there. I saw some of those questions. One of those, for example, about demographic transition, we are definitely going to look at in a moment. All right, map projections. This one here comes from the PowerPoint I use to teach my students. And what you see here is when you make a map projection, you're taking a two-dimensional you're taking a three-dimensional globe, a sphere, okay, and you're putting it onto a two-dimensional surface like a flat map. We do this because if you want to have a two-scale globe, it's going to be like huge as crap. And so that's not very practical if you're trying to get from one place to another with a giant globe in your lap. And so what we would do to simplify the way we understand the Earth is we would create these two-dimensional map projections. And basically, they're going to be cylindrical, conic, or planar. All right, now there's other kinds of projections. We can overcomplicate this all day long, but this here is a planar projection. What you're doing is you're looking at the polar regions. A planar projection of like the mid-latitudes would look really, really weird, and so we wouldn't see that being used. Planar is gonna, sometimes you see this called an azimuthal map. You see this used to understand I guess the true size and scale of a place like Antarctica or the Arctic, because every other map on Earth is going to distort the crap out of those. A conic map, which is like if you took a piece of paper and made a cone and stuck it on the Earth's surface, basically anything that touches the two-dimensional surface is going to be clear on the map. In other words, it's not going to be distorted, which means kind of askew or not correct. So if you would use a conic map to look at Russia, to look at Europe or the United States, and then you've got a cylindrical map. You guys may have heard of the Mercator map. The Mercator map would be an example of a cylindrical map, as would the Peters projection, for example. Anything that you would wrap the paper around the globe, the Mercator map is really, really accurate in terms of size and scale when it's along the equator and really close to it. But once you start getting in the polar regions, you know from studying those maps that it gets extremely distorted, makes Greenland look the size of Africa when we know that Greenland is really about the same size as Libya, for example. Here are other maps that we want to take a look at. So we just looked at map projections kind of like in a broad sense. But there are different types of maps that we use to understand the way the Earth is. And two of the different kinds that I didn't put on this presentation for some reason is going to be a simple political map. Actually, I did put that on the presentation. I just put it in later. A political map and a physical map. All right. So political maps show political units. In other words, states, aka countries. Right. In geography, when we talk about states, we're not talking about the United States. We're talking about anything that we call a country is a state, which is a political unit with people and government and sovereignty. So a political map just simply shows the countries on Earth. And we've all seen them. Most maps we see are political maps. A physical map, though, is going to show you what the physical terrain looks like. You're not looking at states. You're looking at geographic features like mountain ranges, peninsulas, archipelagos, etc. But the third kind of map is what we're going to look at right now in more detail, because next week we're going to talk about physical and political. So it's not in this presentation, it's next week. But look at this. You got thematic maps, and there's all kinds of them. But on the surface, I would definitely know these 5 for the sake of the human geography exam. You've got ice line maps, choropleth, graduated symbol, dot maps, and cartograms. And we've already looked at cartograms. All right. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. We've already looked at cartograms, but we're going to look at that again. We're also going to look at these other ones. So an ice line map is any map that uses lines of equal value to represent data like elevation. So usually, when you see an ice line map, it's going to be something that's going to show you changes in elevation. And it looks almost like little circles. And this right here is a very, I like this map because it's really easy to understand. It is a ice line map, and you can see that these lines, these isolines here, represent rainfall levels. Hey, guess what? That is geospatial data, right? Because this data can be mapped to let us know exactly what the rainfall was at each different, I guess, part of the storm. So this here is Hurricane Harvey's path. Hurricane Harvey came in, heck, I can't remember when it was now, 2017, I think, somewhere in there. So let's see, there's also a mistake in that map. Here are examples of choropleth maps, right? So choropleth in art is usually going to be a map that's got different shades of the same color, like what you would see down here. But for the sake of geography, I mean, I guess cartography would be a form of art. But what we're doing here is any map that's going to show different colors that represent the extent of a certain phenomenon would be an example of a choropleth map. Sometimes you'll see them at the state level or at the country level. Sometimes you'll see them at the county level. But these are choropleth maps. Here is a county level green scale choropleth map. And similarly, and also one other thing I want to point out in particular about cartograms, dot density maps, and graduated symbol and choropleth is that all the data they show, it can be the same data. It's just different ways of visualizing it. What you're seeing here is graduated symbol maps. You take one symbol and you make it bigger or smaller based on the extent of that phenomenon in that location. So this right here is traffic fatalities. Well, Texas and California have huge amounts of traffic fatalities because the skull and crossbones is really super big in those states. Okay, Florida has a lot too. My state probably has more than a lot of states of similar size and population. Why does Texas and California have the most, y'all? What do y'all think? Is there a practical reason that they might? Heck yeah, Jordan. There's a lot more people. There are more people in California than there is in Canada, or about the same. I mean, somewhere around the same amount. The most populous state here, second most populous state here. So it makes sense that more people that can die in car crashes. Also, maybe they're a little cray. I don't know. Never been to California or Texas. But just kidding. I know you guys are awesome. Anybody from Texas and California? Woohoo! Shout out. What you got here is a dot density map. All right. So what you're doing here is similarly to the choropleth map. You might have one dot equals. In this case, we're looking at acreage of cropland harvested. So in this case, you've got 25,000 acres represented by one single dot. And so you can see that, you can measure, I guess, the distribution of a phenomenon and the density of that phenomenon by looking at a dot density map. You see a lot of dot density maps that show population. There is, speaking of which, and I'm surely going to talk about this in a moment, but there is a video on YouTube. You can go on YouTube and do the dot map population and pull up a really cool video there. If you guys haven't seen that, I would definitely, as soon as this video is over with, go on YouTube and find it. It does a good job at showing what we're going to be getting into in just a moment in Unit 2. Cartograms can show more than just population. This is a cartogram that shows the 2002 electoral votes. You can map any geospatial data on these things. And so that can be mapped more quickly and easily than ever before using GIS. I want to take a quick, hang on, didn't mean to do that. Quick timeout. Let's look at some questions here. I see I've got a few more. I want to make sure all the questions get answered. Yes, I can talk, and we'll talk about demographic transition model in just a moment. Stay tuned. Let's see. All right. Can you give the top ethnic conflicts we should know? Let's look at that next week, because I'm going to actually cover a few of them. I can't really say what would be the most important. I can definitely say the ones that I spent the most time on. Off the top of my head, I would know Yugoslavia. I would know Sudan, South Sudan. That's going to include Darfur. I would know Syria. And maybe a few others as well. But we'll look at that more closely when we get to the political conflicts in Unit 4. Do they curve AP test? That's a big no. But I think what you're asking is it will always be the same in terms of the way they grade it. And no, what they will do is, I have no idea how they calculate it, but they always come up with the grading test to test. So I've been asked before, well, what do we need to make in order to pass the AP exam? Nobody really knows, but what I would tell my students is, if you're doing somewhere between a 60 and 65%, which is a failing grade in some states, then you're in a good spot on multiple choice. You also want to do well on the FRQ, but you're not going to know it all, so don't worry about that. But no, they don't curve the AP exam. It's possible for you to correctly answer an FRQ, but the grader is going too fast and not get awarded the points. Is it possible? I think that would be a shame if that happened. Having been a reader, you go. The people there are extremely adamant about doing the best job possible. They become one with the rubric. So I think that the odds of that happening is preposterous. People are human beings. They are ultimately reading your work and trying to make sense out of what you write. So the thing I would tell you is, in order for the reader to be able to get the clearest response out of you, make sure that you're extremely clear and intentional about the way you write it down. I would say what you're asking, no. I really believe that wouldn't happen, but they're human beings. So what would be a more likely explanation is if they couldn't derive from your writing what you intended to say, and it didn't make sense in the way they read it. So when you write it out, be really clear about the way you put it and very intentional about how you structure a response. If you get a chance to, if you're a 500+ member and you want to know more about that topic right there, look back at the FRQ that I did on February the 28th, and I will actually talk about that as I write it, because I think that is super important. It's a good question. Is it possible access to multiple choice sections of any previous exams? It's not supposed to be. They are protected. That said, you can probably find them all over the place. I'm not gonna be surprised one bit if you can't. So, which is a shame, because they can be used as really effective study tools. No is the answer to the question, but I wouldn't be surprised if you can't find them. If or find other places that might house them in disguise, like Quizlet or something. I wish there was a way to get rid of them personally, because it'd be better for everyone if my teacher friends would stop sharing the released exams on different websites. When dealing with maps, it's usually not based on percent of the population. It's usually based on number of population. It depends on the map. It depends on the map. We're actually going to look at population pyramids in a moment, and sometimes you will see population pyramids that use percentages, and sometimes you'll see the ones that use actual people and populations, and so it really just depends on that. Definitely something that you want to look at when you're studying maps in order to know exactly what it is showing, but you never know until you see it. What kind of maps will they ask? Will they use to ask questions about scale? I don't know if I included that in here. Somehow I might have forgotten to put that in. When you look at scale, and I'll address that in a different presentation later on for sure. But if I didn't put it in this PowerPoint, I can't remember. But when you look at different things that have to do with scale, you're looking at the basically how much of the Earth's surface you're able to see at a particular time on that map. Or another way to look at it is why exactly does that map represent in terms of the detail on the Earth's surface. Rubenstein does a very, very good job at looking at this. So remember this: the larger the scale, the greater the detail. All right. So if you're looking at a 1/24,000 scale map, you're looking at every inch on the map represents 24,000 inches. That's a ratio scale on the Earth's surface, and those are going to be pretty detailed. If you're looking at a small scale map that's going to show a small amount of detail, they're going to show a larger land area. So a world map would be an example of a small scale map. Let's see. I didn't. All right, so I answered that question. I hit done answering there. Let's see. I'm sorry I missed. Can you please quickly go over agriculture designs for houses and ethnic cultures? We're going to look at that. Dylan, we're going to look at that in a later video, so I don't want to spend too much time looking at that right now. I hope that's okay. We just don't have enough time. Can you repeat what you said about countries we should look more into, more commonly used on tests? Yes. We're going to look at that later on in this presentation, actually. That is a good question. So there are definitely regions and definitely parts of the Earth, but definitely specific countries that I would know in terms of population, and also in terms of politics, and also in terms of language and religion. So we'll definitely look at that later on in this presentation. Okay, let's see. How important is it to know specifics about certain countries that apply to basic concepts? I'm going to show you. We're going to talk about that in the context of population and culture in just a moment. So maybe that'll answer. I'm not 100% sure, Tyler, what you're asking there. But I think that we're going to look at some. We will be looking at some specifics about some of these specific countries definitely in just a few minutes. Okay, so let's get back to the presentation. Data can be mapped more quickly and more easily than ever before using GIS. GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. Anybody ever use ArcGIS or anything like that online? It used to be that these systems were incredibly expensive and that no one had them except for geographers and map makers. And now we've got online GIS, Geographic Information Systems, where you can take your own data, upload it, and see it geospatially. If that's not amazing, I don't know what is. Some of the things you can use GIS to map out would be population, projected population, in-migration, development plans, accessibility. This is in reference to an FRQ that I wrote for my students. So if you look here, the passage that they're looking at is a school district is looking to build a new school in the district. The new school is designed to take the strain off the largest school in the district, Central High School. The school district has hired a team of geographers to help them decide the best location for a new school. What would they need to know in order to know the best location? They would need to know these things here. And you can use geographic information systems to understand that by layering the different geospatial data, in this case, population, projected population, in-migration, development plans, accessibility, and bus routes. And you can put them on these different geographic or geospatial layers and combine them to form a single map that shows it all. That's what that chart right there is trying to show you. Once you get these different, and when we talk about layers of information, you're looking at literally geospatial data, all right? And you take different kinds of data and put them together, you can see a full puzzle of the different things you need to know in order to know where to put a new school, or in order for McDonald's to know where to put a new McDonald's, or whatever it might be. and so people today that want to know where they need to locate a new business, for example, might very well rely on GIS in order to do that. Toponyms have to do with place names. Okay, so super important to understanding the spatial perspective or the spatial context, the historical and cultural context of a place on Earth. So, and what I mean by that is toponyms are place names, and places are named based on the experiences and the history and the commonalities within a certain region. All right. So, for example, if you look here at, I think I've got a map right here. This one here is a map that shows the silliest place names in each state. All right. So I don't really know what creates, what goes into the naming of these. I love this one. This here is my absolute favorite, Toad Suck. Can you imagine sending a letter to Toad Suck? Hey, where did you go to school? I go to Toad Suck High School in Toad Suck. I mean, that's pretty hilarious. But you got all these different place names, just silly stuff. And if you look more closely at some of these states, you can see even more silly names for places that have maybe some kind of significance and maybe not. I'm not really sure. What you're looking at here is Louisiana. I think. Maybe not. I thought it was. Maybe not. But if you, I'm guessing. Oh, yeah, I think it is actually. But if you look here, you have some. Yeah, Baton Rouge. There you go. Baton Rouge. A few others as well on here. It's not as many examples. Just jumping out. LeCompte. Some of these words here might look a little French. Lafayette. Bridge. I can't pronounce French. I'm really terrible at that. But Louisiana has a French history behind it because it was New Orleans and everything around it. This was something that initially had belonged to the French prior to the Louisiana Purchase. Once again, you got more French in and around Quebec City, and here's Quebec. So you're looking at Canada here. Quebec is an actual in a lot of ways you can consider a stateless nation. You can consider a group of people that is united in their Frenchness and their culture. They're not like everyone else in Canada. So indeed, the culture here is way different. You can see that when you look at the place names in the region. And then here is another. Here is actually close to where I grew up in Lexington, South Carolina. And notice the name of the road here is Industrial Drive. Well, what can you hope to find near Industrial Drive other than a bunch of different industries like Sherwin-Williams and Daystar Trucking and Repair and all these different places here. There's a food industry company called Schwann's who has their corporate headquarters. I don't know if that's a regional thing or what, but you've got a bunch of different industries located around Industrial Drive. So again, the place name is telling you basically what you're going to find in this region. All right. Now, all this that we looked at can kind of be surmised by an understanding of what we're going to call the 5 themes of geography. Now, there are other things. You can look at Patterson's 4 traditions and kind of get the same feel here, but I like the 5 themes of geography because it's really easy to understand and it kind of encompasses everything that we're going to study on the grand scheme of things. So when you break down the 5 themes of geography, you look at location, place, human environment interaction, movement, and region. And I'm going to help you guys never forget this. I don't think I put this in my presentation, so I'm going to type it out. But remember, hang on. Mr. Help. Movement, region, human environment interaction, which would actually be more like a HE, okay? Location and place. It's an acronym for helping you understand and remember the 5 themes. Are the 5 themes explicitly mentioned in the course articulation? They're not mentioned as 5 themes, but they do show up when you're looking more closely at the indicators. So let's talk about briefly. When you look at location, simply you're looking at where something is. All right, so geographers are going to ask, where is it? And you can measure this in both absolute location and relative location. If somebody asks you, hey, how do you get to McDonald's? How many of y'all are going to give them the address to McDonald's? I mean, do you even know that? So what you would do is you would tell them, oh, you just take it right up there, drive until you see CVS, and then just across the street is Chick-fil-A, turn left there and keep going about maybe a 1/10 of a mile, and there's McDonald's on the right. That's relative location, right? Absolute is going to be either latitude, longitude, or an address. Place is going to be the distinctive. Actually, I think I've got slides here for each one of them. So let me take a look at that real quick. Location, where something is, absolute, or and also very similar to when you. I'm glad I went here because I almost forgot to say this. When you look at relative location, it's very similar to this term situation that you guys have surely heard your teachers talking about before. Especially they talk about site and situation, and you might be like, hey, what does that mean, or how are they similar, how are they different? Situation is going to always be like a relationship between where something is in relation to the things around it, right? When you talk about relative location, normally, in my experience, we're looking at where like something on relatively small scale is going to be located in relation to other things like McDonald's. Usually, when you look at situation, you're looking at where something might be from a strategic or economic or geopolitical standpoint on a map. Or it could very well just show you where something is. If you see a map of Hawaii, you might say, oh, that's Hawaii. But if you're not from the United States, you might not know exactly where Hawaii is. So in the bottom right corner, it might kind of show a blow up of the entire Earth and put a little star where Hawaii is. That's situation on a map. So situation and relative location are very, very similar when you think about how they both describe where something is, but in relation to other geographic phenomenon. All right, so the 5 themes help us to break down the various ways that we can use geography. Did I miss something in there? No. All right, so hang on. All right, place is the physical characteristics of a place. So if a geographer who is studying the 5 themes would ask in this case, what is it like here, or what is that place like? What is New York City like? So place refers to the characteristics of a specific location on the Earth. Now, again, when you hear your teachers talk about site and situation, site and the geographic theme of place are very, very similar in terms of their definition. So again, site and place both look at the characteristics and ask the question, what is it like? So if you're describing New York City, it would be very busy. It would be congested traffic. I listened to an article today about people just trying to drive through New York during rush hour just to see how long it takes. Okay, so very trafficy, a lot of people, a cultural blending. All these things are going to be some of the human characteristics of New York City. Some of the climatic characteristics. You know, what's the weather like? Is it still cold there? Is it warm? Does it rain a lot? These are going to be things that describe what it's like in terms of its climate. And then still there are other physical descriptions and characteristics as well in terms of what is the terrain like? Is it mountainous? Is it rocky? Is it wet? Is it prone to flooding or whatever it might be? So these are all things you're going to look at when studying the geographic theme of place or the concept of site. Region is going to be the similarities of a network of locations that bring it together as one, yet differentiate it from others. So people ask me, or my students will always ask me stuff like, well, what's the difference between the study of place in geography and the study of regions? Well, place, you're looking at a single location and telling me what it's like. So you could look at this at different scales. You can look at New York City. You can also look at South Carolina. But usually when you look at something a little bit more broad, like a whole state or a country or whatnot, you're looking at several similarities that bring it together as one general region. And that's what this here is hoping to do. So some of the best ways to understand region is to look at this cultural realms map that you may or may not have seen in your class. And what this does is it very broadly kind of lumps together huge chunks of the Earth as these overarching regions that have these certain characteristics together. So if you look at North America, for example, what are some of the characteristics that exist here? Well, Protestant Christianity is one. English might be another. High levels of development might be another. If you look at Latin America, you think Spanish, you think Catholic Christianity, you think NICs, newly industrialized countries, maybe less, maybe more manufacturing or things like this in terms of the industries they have. Europe, you think about tourism, right? We already saw a map that shows that people go to Europe for tourism. You think about rich culture and deep history and things like this, and so on and so forth. So you can definitely characterize these individual regions as something different from the other regions in very, very broad terms. That's what the geographic theme of region is hoping to do. You can also break it down into different types of regions for a deeper and I guess more for a deeper understanding, and that is formal, functional, and perceptual regions. I'll definitely know these terms because they're labels that we as people have given different places based on how we perceive them. What you're looking at here is a political map of the United States, and it is, well, what kind of region do y'all think that is? Y'all tell me in the comments. Is that going to be a formal, functional, or perceptual region? There we go. I'm liking formal, and the reason is simple. If you look at the United States as a whole, we know where it begins and where it ends. It's got a definite territory, and everyone's going to agree on what that is. It's got a definite set of characteristics that bind it together as one. For example, it falls under the same government. There's sovereignty. In other words, a country has the ability to govern everything that happens here. There are clear rules on who can come in, who can't, and you've got clear boundaries between different countries where other formal regions begin and another one's end. So what you're looking at here is a formal region. Also, you can look at Oklahoma and say it's a formal region for the exact same reasons. So formal is just that. You're looking at things that are definite. They're not even a matter of question. People know what it is, and it doesn't have to be political units. The Rocky Mountains is a formal region because everyone knows where it is and what it is, and people aren't going to debate that region at all. Which kind of region are we looking at here? Sophie predicted my my next question. Good job, Sophie. Indeed, we are. And the other terminology for this, as Sophie also wrote in there, and I would definitely know them both, is vernacular. Okay, so when you think about vernacular, you usually think about something in local context. In other words, a vernacular language might be a certain dialect or a certain way of talking that people in a local level will do. So the reason why we would call this vernacular or perceptual is because people are going to define it in different ways based on their experience. I live in South Carolina, man. I know exactly what South is and what South isn't. And I tell you, well, I know I had it in here somewhere. Well, I guess we'll eventually get to it, but somewhere up here, ladies and gentlemen, you can't get sweet tea. You are no longer in the South. You can't get sweet tea. What the heck? I don't even understand a world without sweet tea. All right, down here, you go far enough. Oh geez, my mouse. All right, you go far enough down here, and guess what? You can't get sweet tea, or at least in my experience, and that's a terrible thing. So definitely a vernacular or functional, or I'm sorry, vernacular or perceptual region, and that's because some people might view the South in different ways. Rubinstein does a really good job at summarizing this. You might see the South as a place where education is really bad. You might see it in a place where diabetes is super high. You might see it as the poorest region in all the developed world because it is. You might also see it in a place where the food is amazing. You might see it in a place where you measure the climate or whatever it might be. So people have different ways of measuring what the South is based on their experience, which also kind of brings me to another topic that I didn't put in my presentation called a sense of place. I wish I would have put that in, but people tend to have deep feelings of identity and of history that gives them an association with a particular region, maybe where they live. For me personally, and I can't speak for you guys, but there is nowhere on earth I would rather live or be than South Carolina, except maybe I could live up here near Black Rock or Hendersonville or something like that in the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina. And I'm telling you, man, there's nowhere else I'd rather be because I just have my entire life is centered on right there in that geographic region. It's the best ever. If you ask people at I don't know, University of Southern California, you say, where's the best place to be? What are they gonna say, y'all? They're going to say right here in California, or maybe they might say, well, certain other places based on like maybe something they've heard, like maybe New York City or whatnot. But generally, people associate very deeply with certain geographies based on their experiences, and that is what we call a sense of place. Okay, let's see. Comments going off the chain. I can't even keep up. If y'all have any questions y'all want me to look at, put it down there and ask a question. And I appreciate the dialogue and you guys helping each other out with stuff behind the scenes here. I hope this is helpful for you guys. We still got at least another hour, and you know, we'll fill it up. Speaking of which, I'm going to look at these two questions real quick. Let's see. What would be the most important units to study for the AP exam? So all of them. If there was one that you could probably scrimp on the most, I would say Unit 1, simply because a lot of the Unit 1 concepts will appear in other parts of the unit. But as you can see here, there's a lot of stuff here that we need to know in order to understand the connections from one unit to the next that has to do with Unit 1. So even though we're looking at stuff like maps and things like this, we've already looked at concepts that are going to help you to understand population and culture and language. For example, in our discussion of regions here, you're going to see all those in just a moment. So I would say, just simply because Unit 1 has less on the test, I would say if there's any one that you spend the least amount of time on, I would spend the least amount of time on Unit 1. To add to that, if you know population, don't spend all your time studying stuff you know. If you are good at population and you're terrible at agriculture, spend more time on agriculture. Does that make sense? What countries do you think are the ones who need to know the location? Nicole, that is an awesome question. Actually, I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, I promise. Wednesday and Thursday, there's an awesome, I see you guys making fun of my accent here. If you go and look up y'all, use guys, there is an awesome language quiz. They'll use dialect and stuff in order to kind of label where you should be from based on where these things are spoken. Let's see. Movement is the last of the 5 themes. And movement describes the interactions between people on Earth. How do we move things? How do we move people? How do we exchange ideas across Earth? Y'all, as soon as Notre Dame Cathedral started to burn, we all knew about it. Oh my gosh. I mean, it was the world's worst thing ever. I mean, we get instantaneous access to stuff that happens all across the Earth because of things like social media. Wasn't always like that, but things like this are going to be covered in the geographic theme of movement. Also, patterns of interaction, migration patterns, daily activity space. You guys go to school every single day. After that, you go to work. Some of you might go, some of you might ride the bus. Some of you might do karate or CrossFit or football practice and whatnot. And you're going to go to, from, and back in usually the same way, give or take a little bit of variation from week to week. So all of this stuff has to do with the movements and the connections of people across space on Earth. So any of that stuff has to do with the geographic theme of movement. And then last but not least, probably one of the most important things in terms of what we are talking about today as a major human problem is human environment interaction. How do we get along with the Earth in which we live? How do we adapt to it? How can we modify it? Do we screw it up when we play around too much with things like the use of fossil fuels? Climate change here is going to be involved in human environment interaction. If you live in the Southeast like I do, especially if you live like around the Gulf of Mexico or Florida, man, you better expect hurricanes because they're a fact of life. Just like if you live up in Minnesota, you're going to have a ton of snow, right? So nobody lives in Minnesota and doesn't expect snow days. No one lives in Florida and doesn't expect hurricane days. And yes, that is actually a thing. All right. Peyton, I'm so glad to have you. Thank you so much for coming in. Evelyn, I used to do CrossFit and I'm just too poor. Hopefully by doing 5 I can afford to get my CrossFit membership back. And of course I need to wait until my ACL heals up because I tore that. I had surgery on April 9th, so I'm down and out. But I love CrossFit. Let's see, diffusion, the spread of ideas. And all right, so here, let's take just a quick break. Look at this one question I've got here. Only just one question, find my mouse. How many times do you say y'all in a week? Man, you can't oversay y'all, man. I say y'all all the time. Y'all. It's like a way of life down here in South Kakalaki. Heck yeah. Thanks for your question. Amen. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at this. Diffusion. Now, this here is one of those things that is, I talked about it in Unit 1, but honest to God, y'all, diffusion is straight up culture, is straight up the exchange of ideas and all these different things. You're going to see it again. It's something that applies to all of the course. In last year's FRQ, there was a question about the diffusion of popular culture in terms of the kinds of words and stuff we use. So even though you can say, well, it's Unit 1 concept, it was pitched as a cultural concept for the FRQ. And so you can absolutely see that, where Unit 1 topics might also be lumped together with different types of with different units in the course, and you might see them together in the FRQ. Diffusion happens one of two ways: through relocation and through expansion. Now, wait a second, don't get confused. There are three different types of expansion diffusion, and we're going to look at them in a second. But relocation and expansion are two broad categories of how things spread from one place to another. Always, 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 relocation is going to be through the migration of people. So if an idea or a religion or a language is going to spread through relocation, that means it moved as people moved with it. Okay? And expansion means that the phenomenon started somewhere, remained in that place, and continued to spread out in other ways. So the difference here is migration is associated with relocation diffusion, and expansion is through word of mouth or through important people or whatever it might be. And let's look and see what this looks like. All right, so expansion diffusion can be broken down into three different subcategories of diffusion: contagious, hierarchical, and stimulus. You guys have heard of this, right? Contagious is like a viral video, or it's like something that spreads like a disease. It's like something that spreads like the measles. Oh my gosh, let's have an outbreak of the measles in 2019 all of a sudden. That's another issue altogether that I'm not going to get into. But contagious diseases spread. You cough on somebody, doesn't matter if that person is rich or poor, it doesn't matter if they're black or white, if they're Muslim or Christian, they're going to get sick, right? So in the same way, viral videos and anything that spreads through contagious diffusion spreads with no regard to social class, race, culture, language, religion, any of that stuff. Right? It just spreads because people are going to engage in that activity. Hierarchical diffusion is when something is going to spread from, let's say, a place of significance due to population or due to government or whatever it might be into a smaller node. All right. So you might see something like a New York City being a place where you're going to see maybe fashion or entertainment in the form of maybe Broadway. Something might start there and eventually go to a smaller city like maybe Atlanta or something like that, and then eventually down to a more local level, local towns and things like this. That's hierarchical. Now, there's also a form of reverse hierarchical diffusion where you might have something that starts in a particular locale, like maybe a small town, and it just, for some reason, just starts to spread out of that one town, and next thing you know, someone really kind of important and cool, someone with maybe an influencer or something, starts to spin with it, and then it gets taken to a bigger city in reverse order. So you do see hierarchical as well as reverse hierarchical diffusion. And then let's see, stimulus diffusion is the one that my students always maybe struggled with the most in terms of their understanding, and that's because I definitely don't feel like textbooks and review manuals do a very good job at explaining it. Simply, stimulus diffusion is going to be when the underlying concept of something more overarching gets taken and modified. Okay, so the best example that I can give you right now is fast food drive-through. I don't know if you guys have Chick-fil-A around where you are, but there is man, Chick-fil-A, man, my pleasure, right? These guys that's God's food, guys. Dang, they just doing something right there. But if you look at McDonald's several years ago started up with a dual window. So the first window you go through, you order your food and you pay, and then you pick up your stuff here. Then later on, they added 2 ordering kiosks. So you have 2 different lines that merge into one. And the idea here is that they try to get you in and out really quick, to speed up the drive-through. Well, Chick-fil-A, what they did is, one, they had to start making like 3 or 4 lanes going around the daggum store because the drive-through is that busy all the time. But they also actually will put people in the drive-through lines, so they are literally standing outside, taking your order, ringing you up, and then you just go through the line and pick up your stuff at the single window. So the difference here is that you don't have the drive-through is the same concept, but the way McDonald's does it with the dual kiosks and the dual windows, it's different from how Chick-fil-A does it with 3 or 4 people actually working the drive-through. Does that make sense how I just said that? Let's see. Maddie says, we did a giant unit of seamless diffusion. The way fast food spread around the world is not the same everywhere. The concept of fast food and eating out is diffused, but the food type, the type served, not so much. Yeah. So there's all kinds of different ways you can look at this, right? Another way you can look at this is, this might be a little bit before your time, but here's a. All right. So if you look back at the earliest Apple computers, okay, so way back, like in the 90s. Apple is the first to use what we call GUI, or graphical user interface. Basically, use a mouse to click an icon. All right. So before that, you need to use a different, like a code, like a DOS code or something like that, in order to get to something like a program on your computer. Well, Apple back then was terrible. Nobody liked them. And so IBM picks up the idea of the graphical user interface and puts it on their computers, and it takes off. And everyone's like, wow, this is amazing. Another example is the iPhone. It's the first smartphone ever, right? And it's Apple's pet project, and they did it, and it was great. And then next thing you know, you've got Samsung and Google and all these other different companies with the same concept, but with a slightly different spin on it. That is stimulus diffusion. All right, so boosh. That's unit 1, kind of summarized in a nutshell, and we're going to look at population. And so it's taking me a long time to get through it. We're going to try our best. Let's see. Do we have an easy way to remember the types of diffusion, like Mr. Help, for the 5 themes? No, I don't have I've never come up with an acronym. You guys could easily come up with an acronym for this. I would encourage you to do that. Come up with your own acronym for it, or a way of memorizing it. But the way I always broke it down is, if you can really remember the overarching concept, relocation, migration, expansion, it literally puffs out from the middle, then that way there would help you to remember the 3 different types of expansion diffusion. That's probably the best I can tell you. But yeah, definitely take the time to make an acronym, and then you can share it with us next week. I think that'd be awesome. Okay, let's look at population. Here's where we're going to answer some of those questions y'all are asking about, like which specific regions, which specific kinds of countries should we be looking at. We're going to do this both with population as well as with culture. So we're going to be looking at specific places. All right. First and foremost, you want to know the geographic distribution of the major population concentrations. So I would be familiar with what's going on in East Asia, South Asia, Europe, North and Eastern United States. All right. And when you look at this little graph, these words at the bottom here, 2/3 of the world's inhabitants are clustered in East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and also Europe. So there's probably just under 1 billion people, or maybe somewhere around 1 billion people or so in Europe. Okay, very densely populated. Population there is not growing at all. In fact, it's shrinking in many countries. But in those first 3 places, you'll notice they all have one thing in common. That's a lot of Asia, right? So the majority of people on Earth today, the largest concentrations of people, are in Asia. There is a, I don't know if you guys follow John Green and Hank and the Vlog Brothers YouTube channel, but there is one that they do about maps. I think it's something like All About Maps. If you look up Hank Green maps video, there is one map in there where he shows you a circle in Asia that represents half of the world's population. So if you look at this cartogram, you can see it visualized. India and China have the highest population of any country on Earth today, and this region as a whole clearly has more people living in it than all other regions combined. In terms of where people live, and we are still looking at the spatial distribution and the why-aware, everything we do, we look at the why-aware. The ecumen is how you say that. Ecumen refers to the places on Earth that can support permanent settlements, okay? So in other words, people can live in these places permanently. And over time, the land where people are able to live has increased. So there's places that may have been previously considered inhospitable that people have actually been able to adapt and modify and live simply by changing the landscape. One place, for example, you look at New York City. It used to be a bunch of woods, and now a lot of it's built on a landfill in terms of looking at Manhattan. But if you look here, you've got different layers of land in terms of how it's farmed, and I think this map is showing 180. So in your textbook, you might see a map that shows as far back as 5000 BC, and one that shows a little bit more modern. But the point is that places where people can live on a permanent basis is known as ecumen. Usually, people live in lower latitude regions along water sources. All right. And here that is in terms of words on a page. And so here are site and situation factors that play into where people live and why they live there. All right. Also, the places that people tend to build, where cities and development are built, tend to have been places historically where food is able to be grown, because that's going to be a really important factor. You don't want to live somewhere where you can't get access to food. All right. So you also can look at population at different scales of analysis. And when we talk about scales of analysis, I mean at a local, regional, or global scale. So you might I think I've got an example here. All right, so you can look at a region like Asia, for example, and see, like I just mentioned, and when we look at the cartogram, that there are more people living there than any other place in the world. And if you look just at those regions, you can study population differently than you can in places like Europe, which actually this is Turkey right here. But if you look at Europe, the study of population is going to be different in terms of the way you look at it, and in terms of the population trends. European countries are extremely developed. High levels of development means there is a huge amount of opportunities. Huge amounts of opportunities mean there's chances for great economic success through education and through careers. Well, if you're pursuing that into your 30, 34, 38 years old, the odds of you deciding, hey, I'm going to have kids, gets lower and lower and lower. So in Europe, you got programs designed to get people, to have kids, so they can sustain the population over time. In places like India and Bangladesh, you got programs designed to prevent people from having kids they can't pay for. So again, different scales mean you're going to look at things in different contexts depending on the regional characteristics. Okay, and you can also look at population on a global scale, and you can see that. And this here is I would call this a choropleth map, even though it's using two different color schemes. It is definitely using colors and not dots to represent the phenomenon. And the redder the color is, the more densely the population is going to be in that region, and the more, I guess, whitish colored or light blue, the less the population is going to be. So again, you can see that population is not evenly distributed across Earth. This right here is very, very sparsely populated. Anybody know why? Does anybody know why this is sparsely populated? Or this? Or this? Or this? It's lots of sand, right? Well, you got deserts. It's the Sahara Desert. You've got the Tibetan Plateau, very, very high mountainous regions, very hard to live there. You've got deserts over here in most of Australia. You got Siberia, way too cold for people to live there under normal conditions. Way too cold in northern North America. Right here, you've got the Amazon, the Amazon area. This is very, very dense forests and very difficult to live there. So these are places that are not really sustainable in terms of people living there on a permanent basis. And again, you can look at local scale and see that even within individual countries, we already know that China and India have the most population of any country on Earth. But if you look even at China, you can see that the population is not evenly distributed within that one place. So most people live along the eastern coast, where you see the most urbanization, the most cities emerging and growing substantially. You can look at pictures of Shanghai in 1990 and then look at pictures of Shanghai 20 years later, and it'll blow your mind how much development and growth and urbanization has occurred in the time. Let's see. And then another way to look at the spatial characteristics of population is to look at I guess, hang on, we're talking about population density really, but when we look at population density, the reason I'm showing you this, I want you to know how it's figured out, how you figure it out. Well, if you look at the United States population, you've got 327.2 million people in 2018. Now this here is just an estimate, but that's a ton of people. That's about a third of a billion people living in the U.S. Did y'all know we had that many people here? In terms of land area, we have 3,500,000 square miles about, and 9 million roughly square kilometers. So how would we figure out the population density? Simply, you would take the people divided by the land area, all right? To calculate population density, you divide the population by the size of the area. Thus, population density equals number of people divided by or over the land area. When you do the math, you end up getting that. So population density in the United States is going to be about 92 people, round that up to 93 people per square mile, mathematists. Or if you're looking at kilometers, it's going to be somewhere around 35 to 36 people per square kilometer. All right. So that's how that there is how you would measure population density. But population density can also be looked at different scales. So you can graph, or I guess chart that, and look at geospatially just by looking at, say, parts of New York City, where population density gets so ridiculous that it's between 5,000 and 25,000 people in some of these darker brown regions. That is so many people in a particular square. I guess it is in a square mile. Yeah, it's in a square mile. So it says that at the bottom of the map. So density can be really extreme and also extremely sparse from place to place. All right. Another way of charting population density is by whatever time of the day it might be. So I was just talking about how you have these crazies that decide they're going to go through New York during their rush hour. Well, at its worst throughout the day, you're going to see population densities like this. And at night, the population is going to be substantially lower in New York City, which goes to show, well, you've got a lot of banking, you got a lot of business, a lot of high-end global services. They're located in New York City or in Manhattan. And so a lot of that's going on during the day. At night, believe it or not, you have less people there than you do during the day. Other cities, you might have some kind of reverse. It's just going to depend on what city you're in and what's going on and when and where. I know that in Cincinnati, where the AP Human Geography reading occurs, you tend to see where, I hope I'm right in telling you this, I think that on the weekends, there's more people, geez, I'm gonna get it reversed. I know. I think it's something like there's more people there on the during the week for work purposes, and then they kind of leave on the weekends. I hope I'm not backwards in telling you that, but you get the point. Different events, day to day, week to week, month to month, or just one-time events can make a difference in the population densities from one place to another. Even in India, you can see, again, population densities are greatest at the base of the Himalayan mountains. Anybody know what country this is here? That is, let's see if anybody knows it. That's Bangladesh. It's close, all right? So this here, we're looking at kind of South Asia, but right here is Bangladesh, small in area. It's the most densely populated actual country that's not a microstate on Earth. All right, so and when I talk about microstates, I'm talking about like basically city-states, small stuff. Bangladesh, right there, and this here is Southeast Asia. All right, here's China. Here's what we consider South Asia, which is going to include Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Extremely dense population here. If you look at a ranking of I think it says 2018 in terms of the overall population, Bangladesh is number 10 in the world in terms of its population density. Okay, the only ones up here with a higher population density are going to be microstates. All right, so they're not. These are small places, like places that are basically the city and the places on the outside of it. Let's see. India was bigger, indeed. Indeed it is. All right. So how would you classify the states above? I just said that they're microstates. We're going to move on from that. But if you look here, Dhaka is the capital of Bangladesh. Now, some of y'all have asked me a few times, hey, what countries do I need to know? In the context of population, no, I'm going to give you a few right now. We've already talked about China. Currently the most populous country on Earth. All right. If you guys need to write these things down, if somebody wants to take notes in the comments, feel free to do that as well. India is number 2. By probably 2030, India is going to have more people than China because of the natural increase rate. We'll talk about that in just a moment. China's population is no longer growing overall. All right, so it's actually going to start going down in time. The third, so China number 1, India number 2. The third most populous state in the world today is the United States of America. And there's a big difference between 1 billion people in India, or 1.2 billion people in India, and 300,000 people in the United States. So we're nowhere close to number 2. The fourth most populous country on Earth today is Indonesia. All right, Indonesia is also the biggest country in terms of the population being almost nothing but Muslims. Indonesia has over 200,000 people living there, about 80% of which are Muslims. And the fifth largest country in terms of population is Brazil. Okay. Now, Dhaka is the capital of Bangladesh. It is extremely densely populated. It's also, a lot of people are moving there in search of opportunities, and you can see that there are these squatter developments. We talked about this a few weeks ago in our discussion having to do with urban geography. These are places where you've got kind of ramshackle housing on the outside of the city where the poorest people live. So the more people go into these regions looking for these opportunities, the more they live on the periphery of this city in search of opportunities that they may do that's not even part of the formal economy. So they might do stuff like maybe a bad example, but shoe repair, shoemaking, or something like this, as opposed to working maybe in a call center or something like that. All right, so let's see. And I got ahead of myself on one slide, right? So I'm kind of summarizing places you should know in terms of population. East Asia, we just now said that. Associate that with China and Japan. Japan is highly developed. Neither one of these places have populations that are growing right now. In fact, Japan is probably has the fastest declining population on Earth. But Tokyo is currently the most populous city on Earth by a landslide. It's like 36 million, some ungodly amount of people living in Tokyo. South Korea is also very super developed and densely populated part of the Korean Peninsula. North Korea, I didn't put that there simply because of the development and the fact that most people there live in more rural. The population is not as high. I hope I'm not saying that incorrectly. I think there's more people in South Korea. I might be wrong on that. But anyway, these are places you think about with East Asia. With South Asia, India, definitely. India is the subcontinent, right? So Bangladesh is right there. It used to be part of India. It was part of the partition that occurred in 1948 between Muslims and Hindus. So Bangladesh is a Muslim country today. Very important. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. Nepal is right along the Himalayan mountains, also very densely populated. And Pakistan is also a Muslim country that it borders India on the north west. Now, Afghanistan is up there as well, but usually I think people tend to lump Afghanistan as more of a Central Asia kind of thing. Afghanistan, I would consider it more Central Asia. And then Southeast Asia, you've got Indonesia, fourth most populous country on Earth. More Muslims in Southeast Asia than anywhere else, or I guess in South and Southeast Asia. Bangladesh, being a Muslim country, is also incredibly populous as well. In Africa, you want to know Nigeria as the most populous African country. You also want to know Lagos as its fast-growing capital. I want to say that Lagos right now is the fastest-growing urban center in the world, and it's the capital of Nigeria. In fact, right now, here's the list of the most populous countries. I should have known I had it in here somewhere. In 2050, or I'm sorry, 2030, the rank is going to change. Okay, we have 30. Wait a second. Reminder: your session and plan is 2 hours, which broadcast will automatically end. Oh my gosh! All right, so we definitely only have 30 more minutes, guys. I didn't realize that. So interesting. Okay, add a additional session by clicking add new session in the event menu. All right, we'll get through it. We'll figure it out. And in 2030, notice the ranking is going to change. India is going to be number 1, China number 2, United States is still going to be number 3, Indonesia is still going to be number 4. But look at number 5. Oh my gosh, Nigeria jumps from number 7 to number 5 with a population change rate of 39%. Y'all, that is a huge growth. Check it out. Only gets better. Only gets better, only gets better. By 2050, Africa has the fastest growth. So a lot of other regions in the world are going to stop growing basically at this time. But Africa is going to continue to just pack on all these people in that region where the population is growing the fastest. I don't know if you guys ever saw Hans Rosling. If you take human geography and you didn't study Hans Rosling and the Don't Panic video and Gapminder and all that, then man, I have a question. I got a question your experience in the course. No offense, but Hans Rosling comes up with a pin code of the world where he breaks the world up into 4 different regions based on chunks of the population. And yes, there's about 7.5 or 7.6 billion people on Earth today, but simply you've got 1 billion living here in the green, 1 billion in the yellow, 1 billion in the blue, and 4 billion in the red. So the pin code of the world right now would be 1114. Okay. Don't worry about it, Peyton. It's okay. You don't need to do this stuff in order to know. It's a really cool resource. I would look up Gapminder and it's just or Hans Rosling on YouTube. Gapminder. It's a really cool source if you get a chance to look at that. All right. So where'd my mouse go? There it is. In the future, you're going to see where the pin code is going to change, right? So by 2050, notice it's going to be 1145. So wait a second. 1 billion people in Africa. By 2050, 4 billion people, or maybe even later than that. I'm not sure exactly if that's the point that I'm trying to say here is that Africa is experiencing almost all of the world's exponential population growth. So you think about things like total fertility rates being the amount of kids that women are going to have. The total fertility rates in some of these countries in Africa right now are still 4, 5, 6, 7 kids per woman. All right. We're going to talk in a second about why that is. But in most parts, if you look at the global average, and Hans Rosling will tell you this in the Don't Panic video, it's about 2.3, 2.4 on global. So if you look at Lagos population today, it's 21 million. It is a mega city, which means it has more than 10 million people in it. By 2050, the mega city is set to triple in population. That is extreme. Okay, reaching about 2. Wait a second, did I say it right? Africa's population is expected to double. Africa's population as a whole will double by 2050 to 2.5 billion people. That one city, based on projections right now, is going to triple. That is cool in some ways, but it's also going to be a logistical nightmare because right now the city is already. Do I have a picture? Maybe I do. I don't know. I guess I don't. Right now, the city is already really poor. There's huge amounts of shanty towns and squatter settlements on the outside of the city. They're having a hard time with resources like clean water and sanitation and all this stuff. How are they going to accommodate this kind of growth? By 2100, this one city alone will be 26.747% of the current U.S. population. Y'all, it's going to be about 1/4 of the U.S. population by 2100. Hopefully we'll see that change, but wow, that is extreme when you think about it in just that one city. So right now you see cities like that growing substantially. I want to say Lagos is the fastest growing urban center on the world today. So when you look at population density, you're also going to have to break it down in terms of the environment. You've got arithmetic density, which is what we've been talking about thus far. Agricultural density is going to be the number of farmers per unit of arable land. Arable land means farmable land. In other words, if it can support agriculture, it's arable land. So agricultural density, again, number of farmers per unit of arable land. In the United States, that number would be lower than it would in, I don't know, Kenya, okay, or some poor country where most people live by sustaining themselves through subsistence agriculture. But it goes to show we have high levels of development because of the fact that we have mechanization of agriculture. That means we can produce far more food with less people engaged in agriculture. Then if you look at physiological density, the number of people per unit of arable land, that's also important because if you have 1 million people in your country and you only have a few acres of arable land, how are you going to get your food? If you looked at Japan right now, they're going to have a very high physiological density. Not enough farmland to support the people, but the country is really well off. They do it by importing the food they need to eat. So again, you can use population density in order to understand more about the spatial perspective of the regions that you are studying. Here's an example. You're looking at the persons per square kilometer of arable land. This is going to be physiological density. Okay. Notice that Egypt is really high. Well, that's because literally the entire population of Egypt is along the Nile River. The rest of Egypt is a big desert. There's not a whole lot of agricultural land there, but there is a bunch of people. So the population, I guess the physiological density will be very low. In the United States, you have a lot of farmable land and you have a lot of people, but since you have a lot of farmable land, the numbers are a little bit lower. And here is agricultural density, farmers per square kilometer of arable land. Notice again, the United States is very low, but below 25, because there are very few people engaged directly in agriculture in our country. They use a lot of machines in order to have high yields. You look in places like China, where if you're further to the west, you're still doing a lot of subsistence farming, or India, or South Asia, or Indonesia, any of these places, you're going to see a ton of farmers. In Africa, most people are farmers still. In most of those countries. All right, check it out. I got some questions here I gotta look at. Which urban model does a city like Dhaka follow? I don't really know. And I will tell you, I wouldn't sweat it that much. When you look at those urban models, they are generalizations, and any kind of a model is going to be a generalization of a certain phenomenon. Okay, so they're never going to be exact science no matter which model you're looking at, but they help us to understand certain trends that kind of exist across the board. So what I would think is, if I was going to apply a city like Dhaka to any of these urban models, and maybe I'm wrong, I would think it's going to follow something similar to a Latin American model, and it wouldn't have the colonial history involved with that. So the area where the rich people live along the stem might not exist in a place like Dhaka. But in terms of where people are going to live, poor living further on the outside, that would be pretty consistent. There are also models of like Middle Eastern countries and other models and stuff like this, but I wouldn't worry so much about things outside of what those models are intended to do. So definitely associate something like Chicago with the multiple with the concentric zone and the sector model, for example. Think about Mexico City or you know, Rio de Janeiro when you think about, or maybe not Rio de Janeiro, but maybe Sao Paulo or something like that. Think about those when you think about Latin American model. But I wouldn't think so much about ones that are not explicitly mentioned in the model. Some people are having trouble getting to Fileable Discord. Can you give us a link for that? Getting to the Fileable Discord. I don't know why that is. Is that the website? I need to figure out what y'all are talking about there. I saw somebody share a link to that earlier in there. I'm not really sure. I'd have to. I should know that, I guess. Sorry that I don't. I will next week. What's the difference between place and location? Simply, when you look at the 5 themes of location, place is going to be the description of a location. New York is cold in the winter and it snows a lot. It's really, really trafficy. There's a ton of people there. There's a lot of cultural blending. That describes the place characteristics. Location is going to be where it is on Earth. So if you wanted to, you could look up the latitude and longitude of New York and find the exact location of that city. So that's the difference there. All right. Here we go. So again, looking at different types of density, this here comes out of the Rubenstein book. You've got the arithmetic density over here. In other words, the people divided by the land area. Over here, you've got physiological density, people divided by the farmable or arable land area. Notice that Egypt's arithmetic density is very low, but their physiological density is very, very high. And then also you've got your agricultural density, which is farmers divided by the arable land. Bye, guys. See you later, Evelyn. Thank you for coming and for joining us. Next week, same time. We're going to go long next week, too. I'll go and give you a hint. Again, y'all feel free to come and go as you need to. Okay, so census. And this is actually going to happen, like, you know, in 2020, the government's going to send out a census that's going to allow us to know what the population change has been over time. And this right here also happens at different scales. So if you look at a census tract, it is going to be an area of land roughly equivalent to a neighborhood established by the Bureau of Census for analyzing populations. Okay. Generally encompass around 2,500, 8,000 people. It's going to depend on where you are. And this Bureau of Census describes them as relatively permanent, but they do change over time, which is why we take the census, because it accounts for things like migrations and interregional migrations. Here is an example of, I can't remember, I think this is census tracts. Yeah, census tracts in Chicago. And you can see them mapped here. And so when you combine the census with our electoral system, all right, we have representatives that you know, in our House of Representatives and per state on the basis of how many people live in that particular state versus some of the others. So if you remember back when you're studying in 8th grade your U.S. history, you talk about the different plans they put forth about how you're going to have representatives. And you've got the 2 senators, and you've got the representatives for each state based on population. Well, this is another reason why we do the census, right? So a congressional district is an electoral constituency. In other words, a place where certain people in that district are going to vote for the congressman that are going to elect a specific person to meet the local needs of the people, all right? It is based on population, which is why we take the census. And so another way of looking at this, or another term that comes up, is precinct. So, and this term is going to change, again, depending on where you live. I know where I live, we call it a precinct. But every single time there's a vote, whether it's a presidential election or a local level election of some kind, or voting on a law, you go to vote at whatever precinct location you are assigned based on which census tract you live in. So the precinct is going to be a location where voters go to vote. For me, it's a local church. It might be a school in some places. It might be a recreational facility that's owned by the city. But either way, the reason why I'm telling you all this stuff is because it's in the course description to be able to understand the census and how it relates to things like the movement of people and the population change, which can result in things like more congressional representation. I know that like 20 years ago in South Carolina, probably not even that long ago, we only had 6 representatives. But because population increased, we actually gained a representative in Congress. And so now we're at 7. This here is a map in South Carolina that shows the South Carolina House District 104 with the different precincts. So what you're looking at here is everyone in this Sweet Home region is going to go to one place. Everyone in Mount Vernon is going to go to one place, and so on and so forth. Okay, so each person within this area is going to go to a specific place to cast their votes. Okay. The number of people, living organisms or crops of a region that can support without environmental degradation, what this defines is a word called carrying capacity. Now, I know it seems kind of like I'm jumping around into different things that are not really totally related, and part of that's because, you know, I am to an extent, I'm trying to cover items directly off the course articulation. So this might not play directly in what we've looked at, but it does play into our discussion of population, because one of the big things today that people have talked about kind of in the same context as global warming is overpopulation. And overpopulation isn't something that's global necessarily in scale, but more of a regional thing. So in the United States right now, I wouldn't say that we're overpopulated, because we have plenty of resources for each of the people that live in our area. But if you go to a place like we just now mentioned, Lagos in Nigeria, well, yeah, you've got a lot of people moving that city, and you might not have the resources, such as stuff we might take for granted, like water, for example, to be able to support such a large population in a sustainable way. So that's when we start looking at carrying capacity. Let's see. Over the great history of humankind, there has been relatively small amount of population growth. And there is another reference to the dot video. I will look that up on YouTube. But even still, population density and in terms of carrying capacity is something that pops up in our culture all the time, whether it be through the study of global warming or even in the Avengers, right? So how many of y'all are going to see the Avengers tomorrow? Man, I wish I could get there. I'll be honest, man. My kids and the kind of week I've had, just don't feel like being up late watching that jump, man. But this is going to be the first one I haven't seen on opening night. I love those movies. I can't wait to see what happens. But Thanos, man, you remember what his problem was? Thanos isn't really a bad guy. He wants to make the universe better, right? Because there's too many people. There's too many people. You don't have enough resources. What happens if you don't wipe out half the world, half the universe? Well, everyone's gonna die because there won't be any resources. I don't know if you guys have seen or read Dan Brown's book Inferno. It's kind of the same exact thing, right? You got people trying to figure out how to solve the greater problem in the world because they feel like the overgrowth of the human population is going to deplete us of all of our resources, and we're killing the environment in the process. Look at the chart. This is super important. This is a chart that shows the peopling of the earth over the grand history of humankind. Hashtag don't spoil the end game. No kidding, man. Y'all better not be doing that for me. Look at this. The world population throughout the great scheme of things has barely changed over time. It has gone up. I'm trying to get that thing to go away. It has gone up, and by 1 AD and 1000, you can see the population overall has grown over the course of thousands of years. But in around the 1700s, about the early, definitely by 1750, definitely by 1800, the population starts to exponentially increase. Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Well, it's simple. We talked about agricultural yields, We talked about the second agricultural revolution that started around the year 1700 in Great Britain and resulted in substantially more food with less work because of scientific approach to agriculture and the mechanization of agriculture. So people started to do less work and have higher yields. Okay, and it resulted in more people having food to eat. Now, I don't know if you guys know this. Again, if you ever watched Hans Rosling, he will talk to you about this. But you've got every woman, the total fertility rate on average was about 6 to 7 people, or maybe even more than that. Maybe it's more like 7 to 8 people on average, or kids being born per woman on average for the majority of that. So for most of this time, women are having 6 to 8 kids, all right? With the expectation, ladies and gentlemen, that about 4 or 5 of them were going to die. How many does that leave? If you on average have 6 to 8 kids and on average 4 or 5 of them die, you're having about 2 kids per family. Well, I don't know if you guys have studied total fertility rate. My guess is you have. What's the replenishment rate for a population, y'all? Who remembers? Replenishment rate for a population. You guys are going crazy in the comments there. Check it out. It's 2 kids per family. So if you're having 2 kids per family, you are sustaining the population. So for the majority of human history, even though women are having a ton of kids and birth rates are really high, death rates are really high because most of those kids die before they're 5 years old. That's really, really sad. So if you look at the population here of the world from the 1700s on up, notice that by 1800 we're at about 1 billion people. By 1900 we're almost double that in 100 years. Then in 60 years we have gotten to 3 billion people. Y'all, in 1960 there were 3 billion people. Your parents were alive. Your grandparents were alive. There are people in your life that remembers basically no people on Earth. That is insane. So in a ridiculously short amount of time, look what the population has done. That right there is why you've got people like Thomas Malthus and Paul Ehrlich and Thanos that think, oh my gosh, we got a problem here, because that is unnatural growth based on the trends that have occurred since the beginning of human history. That's enough to scare people. Why did people all of a sudden start living? I'm going to skip around a little bit. So much here, but I want to skip to this. The reason why there's so many people all of a sudden is because you start to see a difference in the way people are living, which causes less people to die. All right, so let's look at the demographic transition model. First of all, when we talk about natural increase, you're looking at the difference between the birth rate and the death rate. Now, this line here, the red represents the death rate. The blue represents the birth rate. During stage 1 of the demographic transition model, you've got very, very high births and deaths, around 40 births per 1,000 people. That's extremely high. You have about the same amount of people dying. So you don't end up with a huge amount of natural increase. But notice that in stage 2 of the demographic transition model, you have this gap, between the death rate, which drops substantially, and the birth rate, which remains high. So here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. If you are a mom and you know that your mom and her mom and her mom had 6 or 7 kids and 5 or 6 of those kids died, how many kids are you going to have? Well, you're going to have 6 or 7 kids with the expectation that a lot of your kids are going to die. But because of more food, better technology, more access to, more opportunities, whatever it might be, your kids live. And so the death rate drops, causing the population to skyrocket. Ladies and gentlemen, there is never a time, ever, where the population grows on this scale due to more babies being born, all right? Because look what happens in stage 3. Birth rates come down. What does population do in stage 3? Well, notice that there's a lot of red that shows the difference between the death rate and the birth rate. That means there's still a lot of population growth due to what we call demographic momentum. Now, to make this make sense, if you look back here at this chart that we just looked at, notice that the fastest global birth rate, the fastest global natural increase rate was 2.1, and that peaked in about 1970. But population continued to grow exponentially due to demographic momentum. So even though in stage 3, people start to find more opportunities and choose to have less kids due to things like better education and more females becoming empowered through education and opportunity, you still have a lot of population growth. And a perfect example of that would be India right now, or Bangladesh. India or Bangladesh are great examples of stage 3 countries. Stage 4 would be a zero population growth, or basically the population is going to sustain where it is for a little while. And these are highly developed countries like the United States, where we're thinking about population because right now our population is starting to go a little bit below replacement levels, but for the most part right now we're relatively stable in terms of our general population. And then stage 5 is where you see Japan and Denmark and Germany and Italy and most European countries. That is, the populations are starting to decline because people are like, I don't want to have no kids. I can't afford that. Man, I tell you what, I'm so poor. It ain't because I don't work hard, dog. It's because I got kids over there. And the room right across the hall. Nobody can afford kids. So people are choosing opportunities over children in some of these highly developed countries. So the demographic transition is simply a way of understanding the trends that exist with populations over time. Let's see. Sorry, other places. Is there an actual discourse? Or I have to find out more about that. I'm not sure what y'all are talking about with that. All right. So if you look at this, this here is a region that kind of shows you a general breakdown of where countries are going to lie on the demographic transition if you're looking at it at this scale. So Sub-Saharan Africa is going to be mostly stage 2. Southwest Asia, North America, usually going to be North Africa, usually going to be stage 3. Central America, usually going to be stage 3. South Asia, Southeast Asia, usually stage 3. North America, stage 4. Europe is going to be usually stage 4 or 5. Now, Malthus, we just talked about him a little bit. Y'all, I've got 4 minutes. I'm going to try my best. We're going to have to cover culture later. Malthusian Theory, Thomas Malthus lived at the time the population started to grow so much. So he was going on really about the time of the Industrial Revolution. And he started to notice that the people that grew, the population that was growing the most wasn't the rich and the adept. It was the poorest populations, people that were unable to take care of themselves, and they didn't have a whole lot to take care of the kids they were having. So, and again, it wasn't because they decided to have more kids. It was because the death rate had plummeted. So these kids that were having were surviving. Well, what Thomas Malthus had decided, and Thanos in the Avengers is very Malthusian with his approach, is that if people continue to procreate and populations expanded so much, there would come a point where we would meet our doom due to carrying capacity. So there would be a point where we cannot surpass a certain population due to what he called natural checks, which were disease, famine, war, conflict, and competition. Now, he believed that agriculture is going to grow linearly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can only add agricultural, fields to what we already have. But human population was growing what he called geometrically. What we mean by that is exponentially. So you had 1, 2, 4, 16, 256, just a ton of people. And eventually you're going to run out of, there's a cool little chart you can find, which I haven't put here, but you're going to run out of food. This right here kind of shows that over time, however, we have been able to produce more food than our population. And the reason is because Malthus was unable to predict the agricultural output that would be made possible due to the second and third agricultural revolutions. But you still have people like Paul Ehrlich, for example, that say there's going to come a point where we can no longer sustain our growth. And we don't have infinite resources. Things even like water may be our most priceless resource in the next 50 years. So there are people that still think we have a problem we need to figure out how to address. And then there's other optimists that say, well, we'll figure out ways to continually innovate and create more sustainable lifestyles so that we all can live in harmony together. We'll always find a way to do it. So that really is kind of the argument between the two. Y'all, I'm going to have to go ahead and sign off. We will pick up with culture next week, and then hopefully get into looking at Unit 4 and Unit 5, and try to stay on task as much as we can. My goal is to review the entire course by 2 Thursdays from now. So thank y'all very much for being here. We're going to go ahead and sign off, and I will see you next week. Tell your friends, tell your teachers, tell everybody. I'll see you guys next time.